The truth, prosecutors argued, was far darker than the image Richard Rawlings had sold to the world for years. According to the government's case, every loud celebration, every dramatic reveal, and every unbelievable discovery shown to fans was carefully crafted to strengthen a reputation that made people trust him without question. The courtroom heard story after story describing how that trust became the foundation of an alleged empire built on deception. Investigators presented financial records, internal communications, vehicle histories, and testimony from former employees who claimed that what appeared on television was only a small part of what was happening behind closed doors. Jurors were told that ordinary vehicles were allegedly transformed into highly desirable collector cars through forged documentation and altered identities, allowing them to be sold for enormous profits. The prosecution argued that buyers were not simply purchasing cars, they were buying a story, a legend, and most importantly, the credibility attached to Richard Rawlings's name. That credibility, they claimed, was worth millions. As witness after witness took the stand, the glamorous image that had once dominated television screens began to unravel. Experts explained how vehicle identification numbers could be manipulated, how paperwork could be fabricated to appear authentic, and how even experienced collectors could be fooled when presented with convincing documentation. Former employees described an atmosphere where questioning certain practices was discouraged and where loyalty was valued above transparency. The government painted a picture of a business operation that had allegedly become more focused on creating valuable myths than preserving automotive history. The emotional center of the case remained the collectors who believed they were purchasing rare pieces of automotive heritage only to discover that many of those claims were allegedly false. Some testified that they had spent decades saving money to acquire dream vehicles promoted by Rawlings and Gas Monkey Garage. They spoke not only about financial losses but also about feelings of betrayal. Many had admired Rawlings for years, watched every episode of his television show, purchased merchandise, attended events, and proudly considered themselves supporters of the Gas Monkey brand. Their disappointment became a powerful theme throughout the proceedings because the prosecution argued that the fraud worked precisely because of that emotional connection. Fans trusted Rawlings not as a distant businessman but as someone they felt they knew. The government insisted that this relationship was intentionally cultivated and later exploited. During closing arguments, prosecutors stated that the case was not really about cars at all. It was about trust. They argued that every forged document, every altered VIN, every misleading statement, and every questionable transaction was designed to take advantage of that trust. The defense countered by claiming that Rawlings was guilty only of poor oversight and excessive confidence in employees who handled technical aspects of the business. They portrayed him as a charismatic entrepreneur who became the victim of mistakes made by others within a rapidly expanding company. But prosecutors reminded jurors that signatures, approvals, and financial records repeatedly pointed back to Rawlings himself. When deliberations began, many observers expected the jury to spend days reviewing the massive amount of evidence. Instead, they returned relatively quickly with guilty verdicts on all major counts. The moment stunned the courtroom. Reporters rushed from the building to deliver breaking news alerts. Social media exploded with reactions from fans and critics alike. Outside the courthouse, supporters who had arrived hoping for vindication stood in disbelief as federal officials confirmed the outcome. Inside, the atmosphere became almost surreal. According to the narrative presented in court, the larger-than-life television personality who had spent years projecting confidence suddenly appeared defeated. The sentencing phase brought even more attention. Prosecutors argued that the scale of the fraud, the number of victims, and the alleged abuse of public trust justified severe punishment. They emphasized that the crimes were not isolated incidents but part of a sustained pattern that stretched across years and involved substantial financial gains. Defense attorneys pleaded for leniency, citing Rawlings's charitable work, business achievements, and contributions to automotive culture. Friends and family submitted letters asking the court to remember the positive aspects of his life. Yet the judge focused heavily on accountability, emphasizing that fame could not place anyone above the law. The sentence that followed sent shockwaves through the automotive community. News outlets immediately began publishing special reports examining previous Gas Monkey transactions. Collectors started reviewing their own purchases. Auction houses launched internal audits. Insurance companies reassessed vehicle valuations connected to Gas Monkey Garage. The ripple effects spread far beyond one individual. Entire collections were suddenly questioned. Vehicles that had once commanded premium prices because of their association with Rawlings became sources of uncertainty. Some owners feared they might never recover their investments. Others worried that the authenticity of their prized cars would now be scrutinized. Industry experts described the situation as one of the most disruptive scandals the collector car world had ever faced. Business partners moved quickly to distance themselves. Sponsorship agreements disappeared almost overnight. Licensing deals were terminated. Former associates released carefully worded statements denying knowledge of any wrongdoing. Streaming platforms reportedly reconsidered content connected to the brand. What had once been a thriving empire built on personality and entertainment seemed to disintegrate at remarkable speed. The collapse illustrated how fragile success can become when it depends heavily on public perception. For years, the Gas Monkey name represented excitement, ambition, and automotive passion. Suddenly, it became associated with allegations of deception and criminal misconduct. The contrast was dramatic and impossible to ignore. Fans who had followed Rawlings since the earliest days of his television career struggled to reconcile the image they knew with the portrait presented in court. Some refused to believe the allegations. Others felt deeply betrayed. Online communities that once celebrated every Gas Monkey project became battlegrounds filled with arguments, disappointment, and anger. The emotional response reflected just how influential Rawlings had become within automotive culture. He was never merely a businessman or television host. For many people, he represented the dream of turning passion into success. That dream now appeared shattered. As commentators reflected on the case, many pointed to a broader lesson about celebrity and trust. Fame can create opportunities, open doors, and inspire loyalty. But it can also shield questionable behavior from scrutiny if people become too willing to accept appearances without asking difficult questions. Prosecutors argued that this dynamic allowed the alleged scheme to continue for years. The more successful Rawlings became, the easier it was for people to assume everything associated with his name was legitimate. That assumption, they claimed, became one of the most valuable assets in the entire operation. In the end, the courtroom drama was about far more than altered cars or disputed paperwork. It was about the consequences of abusing credibility. Whether viewed as a cautionary tale, a scandal, or the downfall of a celebrity empire, the story left a lasting mark on the automotive world. Richard Rawlings had spent decades building an image of fearless confidence, transforming himself into one of the most recognizable figures in car culture. Yet the prosecution argued that behind that image existed a different reality, one hidden from cameras and fans alike. When the verdict finally arrived, that carefully constructed image could no longer protect him. The legend that had once seemed unstoppable collapsed under the weight of the accusations and evidence presented against it. And as the courtroom emptied and the headlines spread across the world, one message remained impossible to ignore. Reputations can take a lifetime to build, but only moments to destroy.